Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Deb. I suspect that I was invited to give a talk about student analytics because the University of Canberra picked up an award from ATEM on a project, an initiative called Interface, which involves a lot of collection of data and assimilation of data to support students. But throughout this theme, throughout this talk, what I was hoping to keep referring back to was not just the processes, the initiatives that we have adopted at the University of Canberra. And there's a few different initiatives, a few different processes, projects that assist in us supporting students, but actually start asking the question, as I know the whole sector is anyway, and perhaps even reflect the journey that the University of Canberra has been on, which is one of not just how do we collect the data and what data are we collecting and how can we crunch it down into a way that is useful to interpret, but actually why are we doing it and who are we collecting the data from. And the other thing, so that's the sub-theme throughout this presentation. But the other thing that I scarcely touch on, and I wish I had more answers, is so we've collected the data and perhaps we are even aware that we're doing it for students and for good student outcomes. How is all of this work actually achieving better learning outcomes, better graduate outcomes, graduate employment, or whatever the goals are of higher education? There's some tougher questions that I don't specifically answer, unfortunately. I'm hoping that some of your comments and questions towards the end will cover off on that. I bet many of you love seeing the Horizon reports for higher education every year, and it's always instructive looking back a few years at the Horizon reports to see what was suggested was going to be over the horizon in the next year, in the next couple of years, in the next few years. And look, some of them have not been quite as big, as hairy and as scary as we thought over the years, but some of them have been pretty consistent. And student analytics is one of those that has been pretty consistent. And I'm not surprised at that because higher education is no different from many, many other disciplines, areas within the economy and within society that have actually turned more and more to big data one way or another. So I'm not surprised that higher education has consistently said we ought to be thinking about big data and the use of analytics, in this case student analytics, to really not only monitor where we're going and what we're doing, but determine what would be best practice, how we're best supporting our constituents and stakeholders, in this case students. And of course, meanwhile, even looking back at those earlier Horizon reports, things have changed in a big way in higher education more generally. And so I'm really aware, and as all of you are, that student expectations have changed. The technology has changed, so it makes the sorts of things that I'm going to be talking about a lot easier. Patterns of participation, of course, and the different levels of embracing technology, both in the students, but in the staff as well. So some of the things that I'll be talking about, which unfortunately I won't have much time to touch upon, is there's some really big implications for our staff as well. Either we're bringing them up to speed to be able to use analytics, big data, to be able to interpret it, or making sure that we have we're employing people that are used to that. And of course, making sure that our students are absolutely familiar and relaxed about being exposed to those sort of data as well. I feel like I'm a little bit of a fraud because even though I'm talking about this from the perspective of the University of Canberra, and we have been working on different projects along these lines for a few years, I'm absolutely aware that several universities are at least level, and many of them ahead of the University of Canberra. So there are many universities that have been playing in student analytics space and big data space for many years now. And so, the problem with the higher education system in Australia is that whilst we collaborate in these sorts of forums, we're still very competitive when we return home. And indeed, great use of data can be a competitive advantage, as lots of industries know, and I'm sure higher education industry knows as well. So what I thought I would do is try and rip through the talk quite quickly, and instead of just having you ask questions, I'd also invite toward the end opportunities for you to make comments. Not long-winded comments, but certainly comments of, I'm from this university, I'm from this college, I'm from this higher education provider or tertiary provider or vet provider, and we're doing this. Because the more we can catch up over drinks and find out what each other is doing, the more we can learn as a sector. I've struggled with that a little bit, finding out what's going on. Across the sector, I often find out at these sorts of meetings when people have largely done the work. And so that's often a few years of work ahead of that. And I can understand that because of the somewhat competitive nature of universities, but I wonder whether we can sort of be a little bit better than that, at least in the next day or two. I doubt that anyone is absolutely just at the very point of embarking on thinking about collecting data for use of student support in one way or another. But if you are, let me tell you that the very first step to do is make sure that you have absolute commitment from the very top of the university. It costs a lot of money. And it takes a lot of time. And I kept them separate, but if I add them together, then it's multi-millions of dollars if you add all the people's time working on it as well. Just in the systems themselves, I'll try and give you some costs along the way, but it's many millions of dollars that we've spent on making sure that we have good data collection, analysis, interpretation and distribution to our staff and to our students. And I think we've done it pretty inexpensively at the University of Canberra. I know many people spend more time than that. So don't go down the road of this if you haven't got your boss saying this is absolutely important. And this is our current strategic plan for the University of Canberra, but the previous one said similar things. So it was committed from the top, and that's lucky. And my strongest suggestion to everyone is don't go there if you haven't got commitment from the boss. Okay, a few things that I won't talk about. We've just changed our learning management system over the last year or so from Moodle to Canvas, and we took advantage of that to start pulling the different systems together. Students had to jump from, I don't know, Callista to Allocate to the learning management system at the time, Moodle, and they had to know which systems are in. We just expected students to, damn it, you'll learn it, and you'll learn it the hard way. We started off by combining a lot of those systems within our virtual learning environment, as many of you have done. I know that's for sure. I'm going to be mostly talking about interface, but I thought I'd touch on the CRM because we're pleasantly surprised how the two are collaborating, are important to feed each other, to give that positive feedback. And then something that might be a little bit of news to a few of you is the digital student journey. I really want to focus a little bit on that as well, because what we're trying to do is imagine a world where students really didn't care what system was driving it behind, where they didn't have to check their emails or their timetabling or the results pages or search their learning management system, but it was all there in front of them and genuinely personalised and genuinely supportive. And that's, many universities are aiming for that, and we are as well. And we refer to all of that as the digital student journey. It started off a few years ago, and I know some of you in the audience were there when I spoke a couple of years ago, it might have been at EduTech, about CLASS. You've always got to give a project a really cool acronym, don't you? And CLASS stood for Centralised Learning Analytics and Student Support. And the idea was, we've got enough data to be able to predict whether students are at risk or not. That's all that is. That's all the red, orange and green. You don't need to see the rest of it. It was just and so we started looking at all the data we had and seeing whether we could combine it all. And we spent about $750,000 on getting this system working. Okay. And it seemed like a great idea at the time, isn't it? That you would be able to identify ahead of time whether students are likely to pass or fail a subject or whether they can get in trouble in a subject or not. What are the sorts of things where we get this data from? I was just amazed, many of you won't be, at where we have data. We have data from all the student details, student records, addresses, email, HEC status, census dates, transcripts, previous subjects. That's just on the students. Oh, by the way, did I mention postcodes? Because that actually is significant in whether a student is likely to go well or not. Then all the various course achievements prior to that. Have they failed the subjects before? How are they going? What sort of pass rates? That sort of stuff. The unit performance within that. Are they Are they actively online? Are they interacting with their students and their teachers? And then we started thinking, maybe that's all fine, but maybe we also ought to be thinking about getting the voice of the student. the perception data, how they felt they were going as well. So we realised there's a whole lot of problems with the class data, but it wasn't a waste of money. And that's another quick lesson I think I've learnt and advice to anyone that's embarking on this at the start. And that is, everything that we did cleaned up our databases. Everything that we did cleaned up our data warehouse. And a lot of the stuff that I'll be talking about now wouldn't have been possible if we hadn't actually been cleaning up the data warehouse. So all the different sources of data. And I bet you can think of it, if you stop to think, there's a dozen sources of data and databases that your university is using for any given student. And pulling all those together and having it all working together, and then having algorithms, engines behind that that can start doing some predictive analysis is great, but you've got to get the data right the first time. So that wasn't wasted, but we realised that there was a whole lot of faults with just a static predictor of whether a student will go well or not. For starters, it didn't have the student voice. We were using it ourselves, or were we? Well, it was difficult to know whether staff were actually using it or not. If a student was at risk, do you send them an email? Hey, I believe you're at risk. Gee, that's a lousy postcode. Do you think you need to contact me? Well, those students are probably less likely to contact you anyway. So we were quick on the data, but a little bit slower on exactly how we're going to use it, how we're going to interpret it, and the important thing, the theme I keep coming back to, how are we going to support our students with this? So that we changed all of that and created something called Interface. This is actually what I'm meant to be talking to you about today. Interface is now 3 different dashboards. Don't worry about the text. Really just think about them as 3 different dashboards. On your far right is a student dashboard. And instead of collecting the data secretly from the student, we're giving the data back to the students. And we're providing the students all the things in a one-stop shop that we believe and they have told us that they would like to have. They want to know how they've gone in past subjects and how they're going now. They don't just want to know how they're going in their given subject. They want to know how the average student is going. So they've got something to aspire to as well. If you've responded a day or 2 late, or you've put in a couple of text messages, or you're working on a group assignment but you're 2 days late, is that bad? How bad is it? A whole lot of students ahead of you, behind you, what would the average be? So it's that sort of feedback that we're giving the students. The middle interface dashboard is for the unit, the subject coordinator. And I'm embarrassed to say this because I bet a lot of universities and colleges and TAFEs already do this, but we made the staff go from system to find out how did these students go in previous subjects? How many international students have I got? What's their average GPA? All sorts of things. What are the different courses they come from? And we really made it difficult. So we've made it very, very easy for the staff as well. And that was important to bring them along the journey as well. And so they have not only all the class data, all the information they require of their class, and all the different cohorts, they also have a whole lot of feedback from the students, and this is the important bit. We gave the voice to the students to tell us every single day how they're feeling about their subject and about their experience at the university. And we're feeding that back into the subject coordinator's dashboard every day. And we collapse that to weekly so they don't have to react immediately. And then finally, on your far left, we have Interface X, which is notionally for the executive of the university, but that feeds into the course coordinators, the heads of school, the deans of the faculty, and so they can look at a helicopter level and say, how are our students going? Hey, I'm a little bit worried about this discipline, and drill down, is it a subject, is it a particular person, and get that sort of feedback immediately. I think what was driving us more than anything was that we wanted students to have that voice, to be able to give us feedback. And we realised that not only did the students want it, and it was good for them, it was fantastic for us. It was fantastic to be able to see if a student, if a unit suddenly had students voting, let's go negative for a second, suddenly had students in their up votes and down votes of the day suddenly tank downwards. Now, what have we found? We've gone down the hallway, spoken to the dean, checked it out, and a sessional staff member had been sick and no one knew. or that a couple of tutes had been cancelled because it was 2 Mondays in a row and we hadn't stopped to think what the implications were for the students. So suddenly, instead of finding out at the end of semester that the students weren't very happy, we find out right away, in almost real time, hang on, there's something going on and we can do something about that quickly. But the important other thing about that is we also see when things are going very, very well. And we can so please don't be thinking that this is a deficit model. We can certainly tear down the hallway then and say, what's going on? The students are loving it. And it might be just, you know, really simple things, and it's so obvious when you hear it. It was because the staff member, assignments were returned, and the staff member was really positive about, not great grades, but really great feedback about where they could learn and how they could improve on the next one. And the students really loved it. So it gives you a really good idea of the sorts of feedback that we're using in Interface. So it creates worms, it creates upvotes and downvotes and all sorts of data that we can use very, very quickly. There's a mind map. Don't you love a mind map? So students can say how they're feeling about the university generally. And this is quite instructive as well, because the mood changes about week 3 or week 4 of a semester, as you may well imagine. Suddenly the assignments are beginning to get due. But the important thing for us is that we could feed this back all the time and are now expecting staff to show reflection on these data. And so we've built it into our performance expectations, we've built it in, but importantly, again, not a deficit model, staff now have access to this to show in promotions and in teaching awards and other things. Look what I'm doing, look at the feedback I've got and how I can react as a reflective teacher. I love that graph only because it shows that they're more active in the week and they take weekends off, but so do the staff. And this is just sort of the activity that you might expect in feedback from students. There's all sorts of benefits, and I think I've covered them in the students and the staff. But and don't you always have to have in these sorts of talks the very best student feedback comment that you can possibly have? So don't fall for it. I picked out the best one. The other thing that we really love about this is that we used to have at the end of semester something called USS, Unit Satisfaction Survey. And now, as well as the voting every day and the cloud map and the feedback, we also have formal surveys 3 times a semester. 3 times. And it's gone from about a 10% feedback response rate at the end of semester to 35, 36% last semester of student feedback. So you're getting a whole lot of feedback at critical times, just before HEC census, in the middle of the semester, toward the end. And they're different questions, and the students are much more readily answering to them. So that's what the executive level dashboard looks like, and you might imagine we can query all sorts of areas and how people are going. The CRM, I don't need to tell you much about the CRM because I'm sure you've all got CRMs, and that's the trick. So did we. We had a few, and the problem was, and I don't know whether some of you have the same problem, the problem was pulling it all together. So, and making sure that the CRM fed back genuinely into Interface and really cut down on all the noise that the students were getting and the staff were getting and all the hassles with that, and really created simple systems, modified, coherent communications with the students, and the CRM has done that. And we're still implementing that, but that's working really well. It's just, I think that graph more than anything is showing it takes a long time to get it right, and we're still on that journey. And then finally, the digital student journey, and then I will stop, Deb, and it goes a bit like this. We have students, you know, potential students. They inquire, but they haven't given you their name yet. They've just gone online. And then maybe they've filled out a form and you've got a name. But then that's a different process to when they actually get an offer. And then that's a different process till they finally get this unit, their email, and we can start sending them emails. Can you see how we've just chopped and changed? Now, there is technology out there that actually you can use IP and other things, even before the IP address, even before you have got their names, but you can start working on a seamless student journey. And we're doing that at the University of Canberra with Adobe and Isobar, and it really does have a way of students having personalised data, everything they want, personalised communications, and they don't have to chop and change. That's the ideal. We're about halfway through there. This project is maybe $6 or $7 million worth of technology plus staff time, so it's not a cheap thing to do, but it does allow us to really hit some of the principles of how do you genuinely make it seamless? How do you genuinely make it a competitive advantage for over other competitors in the sector? And how is it actually helping the students? And I suspect that the answer for this is yes, it helps the students in their experience. And we at the University of Canberra was pretty middling in the student experience ratings and pretty poor on student engagement. So this might be helping that, but it's still got this underlying question of, is it actually assisting our student learning? I've got a partial answer for that in a moment, and I won't tell you all about it, except that it should look like this. And this will now come live in the middle of this coming year. So we're still 6 months away, but all the trials of this is going well. And it basically recognises who you are every time, and there's no extraneous information, no emails to everybody. It's really, really personalised. And you don't have to hunt then for the library resources or for your unit, you know, your enrolments, your calendar, your room allocations, nothing. So we've got all the systems finally working together. And that's truly personalised, which is certainly a goal that a lot of people are aiming for. So that's cute, but it leaves me one final question, and that is, and I've referred to it a couple of times, I think that it does help in a partnership, in a learning partnership, when universities and students get together, staff and students get together and say, let's learn together, let's communicate and let's see. But I'm not positive, so I think that helps. Does it help the student experience in general? Of course it does. That's a whole lot more personalised and a whole lot better fun. But what about this goal of adaptive learning, where students can really bounce around and revisit stuff and really? So I think there's still all sorts of challenges in this space where it could be a whole lot better. And frankly, I think we're just scratching the surface there. But I know a lot of universities are on the road to this sort of stuff. We are too, and I'll be happy to share some of that information. I'm going to another university, so what do I care? I can tell you about all the costs and everything else. I'll stop there. Thanks very much.
Questions for Nick?
Or comments?
Or comments? No, we like questions before comments.
Okay. But I want to hear from everyone.
Here we go. What support is provided to staff who work with students at risk?
Yes. Well, it's a great question, because the first thing we did was, hey, we've got this is 3 or 4 years ago now. We've got this thing called class. We know the students at risk. Here is the data. Crickets in the background. And some staff said, thanks. I'm not quite sure what to do with. And in a class, it might have been 3, 4, or 10 students that are identified at risk. And so then we soon quickly realised that at least we had to give them supportive sample communications. Dear student, not you come from a lousy postcode, but dear student, it's now week 3. We're wondering whether you need any extra support, or it's now week 3. We've heard lots from you, and we really encourage that communication. Or we haven't heard much from you, and if there is anything, here's telephone numbers and online support and other things. So just that initial communication. But then we started looking a little bit further. Of course, the data started refining itself, and we got better and better, because staff were quick to come back and go, you said they were at risk and they were fine in my subject, and they were sort of proud of it. So the data keeps on learning, and we're getting better and better, and staff are now sharing some of their best practice, the sorts of things that they do to communicate with the students. And it depends on whether they're there in your class and you can catch them and chat to them about it, or whether they're distant, or whether you're not seeing them very much and you're doing this by email. And there's one other thing, and I didn't touch on it. You've got a lot more ability to crunch. So if a student is struggling, or if you've got some poor results from feedback from one of the surveys, you can break that up into, is these students, are the students that are going well the ones that have gone well in lots of other subjects? Are they peculiar to my subject? Is there something that I can learn from a previous subject that clearly got better feedback? Can I go down and speak to my colleagues? So it's a long-winded answer to, we're learning as we go. Everybody's teaching each other as we go. I don't think there's any perfect answer, and the more personalised you can make it for the students to support, the better. Oh, and we do professional development along these lines.
predictive algorithms are really interesting, but they're best if they're transparent. And that's often the problem, that they're often utilised without the knowledge of the people they affect. Is it an ambition that students would be able to see the critical factors that you're proposing, place them in the definition of being at risk?
Yeah. So the interface, the way we've gone now, the predictive algorithm of whether students are at risk or not is such a tiny part of the overall thing now. It just started off that way. But it's still the data and it's still there, and I think still useful. And there's two bits to this, Deb. One of them is many staff, and indeed many studies have shown that the academic staff, have got apprehension about the black box algorithm. And I can't tell you, even on this given day, what are the factors that significantly influence the likelihood, because it changes every night. At midnight, the algorithm continues to learn. So the last time I looked, there was 57 different factors that significantly affected the likelihood of a pass-fail in a subject or continuation of a course. So there's a lot to feed in there. So there is a bit of trust going on there. But to date, we haven't had any pushback from students at all going, how are you profiling me? Because we don't really refer to the risk when we contact the students. We refer to what can we do to help. It just gives us some knowledge of, hey, if it's gone quiet and this student might have failed subjects in the past, perhaps we ought to put in extra effort in this space.
It's a delicate balance, isn't it? Because one of the things you want is for students to be able to identify themselves that they're at risk, like not to have to rely on a machine algorithm. And that should really be one of the things, self-awareness should be one of the things we teach. But then you run the risk of, as you just said, profiling, which can then become a determinant. So
yes. So how we have addressed this, and look, Deb, even as I'm explaining it to you, I'm thinking that it's a little bit feeble, is to give students an indication of how the average student's going in this type of subject. Even if it's a small subject, we can tell from third year, this discipline, the average student would have done this or got this grade or submitted this assignment by this time. So we can still give them some indications and some aspirations without actually saying we've profiled the data specifically for you. So.
A couple of questions around the fact that this is operating very well for you at scale, but what about small providers? Is there some way in which they would be able to benefit from the sorts of systems you're developing in a larger institution?
Yeah, I understand, I just haven't done the research on it. I understand that there's more and more proprietary type software that does this. Of course, industries all around the world are using big data in lots of different ways. So we developed a lot of this ourselves, and that's the problem of being at the sort of the bleeding edge. So I think, and that would be really interesting to get feedback from various people that are using this CRMs, many other databases have got built-in algorithms already, and it may well be for smaller organisations you can just use that sort of off-the-shelf stuff. I just don't know enough about it because we've gone down the road ourselves, and it's an interesting situation. It's sunk cost fallacy, isn't it? You've sunk the costs into, and you go, well, I can't possibly leave this now. You're looking across to Dick and going, hey, is that a better way? But so it's interesting that you almost paint yourself in a corner, and in fact, you want to be as agile as possible. So it's something else to watch out for in this space.
Questions around time resource allocation for staff who are spending a lot of time either dealing with data or looking at data or developing data rather than actually just building the relationships.
Yeah, it's interesting the way that question was worded. Was that your fault or their fault? Oh, sure, Deb. Because it's the other way. It's the other way around. I think the vast majority of staff, all the staff that I've spoken to, really give a damn about their students, but it's just, we made it too difficult to find out how we could support them. And so this system actually saves time. You're there, most academic staff is the first thing they open on a Monday morning, and probably most mornings, how are my students going? What are they feeling? What are they doing? And I don't have to shop around. So I think we need to allocate staff and resources for professional development support on how staff can use this. But in terms of access to the data and turning students around and supporting students and giving extra encouragement to the students that are doing well or excited about a subject, we've made it actually easier for the staff.
Brilliant. I think that's a good point to end on.
Terrific.
So if we could say thank you to Nick.
Thank you.